Joining us now is political analyst Professor Joe Siracusa. Joe Siracusa, thank you for your time. Let's start with China's largest ever military parade. We saw former Victorian Premier Daniel Andrews. He was there at Tiananmen Square smiling alongside Iran's president, Chinese President Xi Jinping, Russian President Vladimir Putin, North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un. And let's just take a look at this parade. Okay, so Donald Trump has responded and he's accused Russia and North Korea of conspiring against the US. He posted on Truth Social. The big question to be answered is whether or not President Xi of China will mention the massive amount of support and blood that the United States of America gave to China in order to help it to secure its freedom from a very unfriendly foreign invader. Many Americans died in China's quest for victory and glory. I hope that they are rightfully honoured and remembered for their bravery and sacrifice. May President Xi and the wonderful people of China have a great and lasting day of celebration. Please give my warmest regards to Vladimir Putin and Kim Jong-un as you conspire against the United States of America. President Donald J. Trump. Joe, what do you make of this response?
Well, the president is correct. The United States expended a great deal of blood and treasure to defeat Imperial Japan in the Second World War. And the United States, ironically, was China's best friend up until about 1949 when the Chinese communists took over Beijing and proclaimed the People's Republic of China. So the president is technically correct on that. And actually, they do honor the Flying Tigers. That's General Chennault's people who worked on with the Chinese during the Second World War. But keep in mind, we go from the nationalist Chinese to the communist Chinese. We got a different crowd. Now, look, let me say something about this parade. During the Cold War, they used to, the American Congress used to grill the head of the American Armed Forces, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and say to him, how's the enemy? The enemy's got this and that, and we need this and that. And then someone would say to him at the end, would you trade their forces for your forces? And the answer was always no. Look, it was a big showy parade. It was designed to assure people in China that the government of President Xi Jinping is in control. It's designed to keep the Communist Party in power. It's not designed to keep the enemy out. I mean, nobody wants to march into or roll into downtown Beijing or Shanghai or any of that. And so, it was pretty much a theatrical production. Now, I do get a kick out of Putin and Chairman Kim and the others. And there were some other nations there, some of whom are pretty scary, actually, from Central Asia. And they really don't complement each other. I mean, China has a huge border with the Russians, which the Russians are always wary about, and the Chinese go crazy trying to figure out if North Korea is going to get them into a war or not. So, I don't really worry about that. They're not all that in sync, as a matter of fact. But I do find it odd that an Australian politician would show up for this particular event, though I do encourage diplomacy and negotiations and conversations all the time. So that's important. But to give aid and comfort to the enemy, China's not the enemy yet. It's an adversary. And the United States spends more on its military than they do. And, frankly, you want to show of force? Well, how about a B-2 over Tehran? I mean, that's a show of force. Otherwise, this is pretty flashy. And it's fun to watch. I mean, Gabriella, who doesn't like a parade?
You say it's odd that Daniel Andrews was there. Is it a little bit more than that?
Well, look, when I talk a lot on Chinese in Chinese media, which I don't get paid. And I got a phone call once from some real scary people in Canberra asking me whether I got paid for it. The answer is no. I don't get paid to talk to Chinese or Russian media or people in Istanbul or anything else. I mean, that's the whole deal of being an academic. And, maybe he's in violation of the benefit or the Foreign Interference Act. I mean, I don't know. I mean, the idea of being in the back row there with some of the world's great dictators. And by the way, that front row has got a guy there who is indicted for war crimes. I mean, it's not a very classy crowd. So, Andrews ought to pick his friends more carefully.
We'll see. I thank you for your assessment, but I mean, what message does this military parade really send? Do you have concerns, I suppose, for the West seeing all those world leaders together?
Well, yeah, I mean, it looks like they're together. And look, the Chinese have a massive military to match their place in the world in terms of their economy. There are top-down armed forces. That is, if they lose their command and control people, the place would just fall apart. Keep in mind, the last time the Chinese fought was with the Vietnamese in 1979. As I recall, the North Vietnamese gave them a real beating. So, they're not really they're not tested. So it's not that scary a thing. They look good. They look pretty good. And I'm not sure how much of that stuff is operational. But look, the Chinese are poised not to take over the world, but to throw their weight around. And, we can't keep them out of Taiwan. One day they're just going to march in, and that's the end of that story. I'm more worried about how they feel about freedom of navigation in the South China Sea and things like that. I mean, when they start running up against the U.S. Navy, that's going to be a different story. I mean, there are points of conflict there, but I think at the end of the day, the Communist Party, which has 100 million people in China, trying to keep 1.4 billion people down, and it's, at the end of the day, it's run by about 3 people, including Xi at the top. I mean, they're always worried about the end of their time. The Chinese, they're obsessed about what happened to Moscow-dominated communism. They spent billions of dollars trying to figure out what happened to the Soviet Union in 1991. So they blamed it on bureaucracy and corruption and things like that. They just don't want to go that way. And they've been going now for about 73, 74 years. And that's the life span of a Communist Party, by the way. So, they're worried about that. But I think Xi has parades like that in order to show the Chinese people that he's in control, that he's on the world stage. And I listened very carefully to the English translation of his speeches. He's talking about peaceful coexistence. Well, that's okay with me. He's not interested in landing Marines in too many places, but he wants to throw his weight around, and he wants a military that matches his economic impact. I mean, half the world is in debt to the Chinese in terms of trade balances. And so, he wants a military that sort of matches China's economic strength. Is it poised to go out and conquer the world? Not yet. I mean, I wouldn't worry about it. But look, it's very impressive, and they've come a long way in the last 20 years.
Let's talk about Putin. Vladimir Putin has vowed to fight on in Ukraine despite Trump's efforts to pursue peace. In a speech during his trip to China, Putin claimed that he is willing to meet with Zelensky if Zelensky comes to Moscow.
The current administration of the United States, we see also that they've got the will and desire to find this solution. I think there's a light at the end of the tunnel. Otherwise, we'll be forced to resolve all our objectives through military means.
Donald Trump was asked at the White House today about the progress, the slow progress, I suppose, in bringing this war to an end, and he really fired back at reporters. Take a listen.
You expressed many times your frustration and disappointment with Putin, but there's no action since you took your office.
How do you know there's no action?
But
really? Wait. Who are you with?
I'm with the Polish radio.
Okay. How do you know there's no action? Would you say that putting secondary sanctions on India, the largest purchaser outside of China, they're almost equal, would you say there was no action? That cost hundreds of billions of dollars to Russia. You call that no action? And I haven't done phase 2 yet or phase 3. But when you say there's no action, I think you ought to get yourself a new job. Because if you remember, 2 weeks ago I said, if India buys, India's got big problems. And that's what happened. So don't tell me about that.
The White House confirms that Trump will call Zelensky today to discuss the war. Joe Siracusa, can I get your assessment of where things are at the moment?
Well, I think Zelensky would have to be crazy to go to Moscow. He'd probably be shot or arrested or something like that. He's not going there. And look, Putin is positioning himself for the final the final treaty. Now, it took 5 years for America to get out of Vietnam, 7 years to get out of Iraq, and 20 years to get out of Afghanistan. So there's no quick fixes here. And what Putin is doing, he's putting pressure on. He wants the best position when they have to sit at a table. Zelensky's looking at his last days in office. I mean, he'll probably be going one of these days. And the Ukrainians are going to run out of friends in the United States because the Republican Party just doesn't want to give them any more money. And, the time has come to call a halt to the death and destruction in the place. But look, Putin is just playing the game, and President Trump is serious about second and third tertiary type sanctions and the like. And, he's making life miserable for the Indians who didn't expect a 50% getting socked for 50% on that oil. But look, President Trump is playing all the cards he has, and of course he's made it very clear, he and Rubio at the beginning, Secretary of State Rubio, that if they can't persuade the Russians to quit, they'll just walk away and let the Russians finish off the Ukrainians. I mean, Ukraine has fought very hard and heroically, and they've acquitted themselves with honor. The idea of a nation that size beating a nation with 11 time zones was always impossible, and it's just not going to work out. So they're going to have to come to some kind of arrangement. But I think Zelensky has got to play his cards very carefully here at the end so that when he leaves politics, he can leave without rocks being thrown at him. But I think we're at the end days here, and President Trump's in a perfect position. The Russians can take American assistance here, Zelensky can take American assistance here, or the president can just walk away. And let me tell you, Gabriella, in my lifetime, I have seen the United States walk away from South Vietnam, from Hungary, from Czechoslovakia in '68, and so on and so on. So when the U.S. is fed up with a place, they just leave. They don't lose anything. They just go home and do something else. So Zelensky has to be very careful here, but he has to seem agreeable. And Putin, of course, at the end of the day, he needs the United States for trade and economics. And keep in mind that Putin and President Trump are in charge of 90% of the world's nuclear weapons, thermonuclear weapons. So it's a very important relationship.
Let's turn to the crisis in the Middle East, or the conflict, I should say. Trump has warned Hamas to give back all 20 hostages in order to bring an end to the war in Gaza. He wrote, "Tell Hamas to immediately give back all 20 hostages, not 2 or 5 or 7, and things will change rapidly. It will end." He, of course, posted this on his social media network, Truth Social. Look, we all want to get those hostages back so desperately. It's been nearly 700 days since October 7, 2023. Joe, do you think this warning, there have been warnings in the past, is this one going to cut through?
Well, it might. I mean, Hamas is looking for the exit ramp here. I mean, there's still about 14,000 Hamas fighters, according to the sources that I see. And, of course, Gaza, of course, has been flattened like a parking lot. And, he's trying to give Netanyahu here, he's trying to throw him a bone. If he can get those hostages out of there, that will satisfy his critics. And keep in mind that there are a lot of people in Israel who are very angry with Netanyahu for the length of the war and what they're being asked to do right now. And the thing that keeps them all together is, what about the hostages? Is it 20, 30, 40? I mean, how many dead bodies do they have around? And the 20 who are supposedly alive, they're probably at the end of their tether. And of course, it's very clear to me in the early days of the attack, the Hamas attack on Israel and the Israeli response, that the Israelis probably were going to give up the hostages. That is, they were going to factor them into their own death count, because you can't not defeat Hamas for 20, 30, 40 people. I mean, that would sort of subtract from the actual victory. At the end of the day, the Israelis have won this, and they've won it very well. The problem is they're on the verge of losing the peace. That is, no one's going to believe what got them going in the first place. And of course, if Netanyahu doesn't survive, his government doesn't survive this war, then it means nothing to them. So, we've come to the point now where we're trying to make some meaning here. We need a narrative at the end, and it would really be great if Hamas just did something important, noble right now, and that's
how likely is that?
And said this.
Really, how likely is it that Hamas will do something noble?
between Zero and Buckley's. They're not going to do anything like that. There might be someone at the end there who sees, like the Syrian guy who wound up as the terrorist who wound up as the head of Syria, somebody who's looking for a little bit of an exit strategy here to look, I don't mean great, but statesman-like, Well, we have to give up the hostages because we're at the end of our tether and it's, that kind of thing. But Hamas has played this very badly. Look, these are gangsters. And, the problem with the Israelis from day one is they haven't been engaged in a war. They've been fighting people who are home invaders. These guys just are criminals. And the idea of treating them like military people is a bit of a joke. But, at the end of the day, you got to deal with somebody. And so, there's no one left to deal with. And there are people in America and other places, in Israel, who want those hostages back. As I say, I doubt many of them are still alive. And if they are, Gabriella, they're in very bad shape.
No, it's absolutely heartbreaking. Look, finally, I want to ask you about what is happening in the United States. And Trump says that he will be sending the National Guard to Chicago to tackle crime, while, of course, Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker and other state leaders remain adamant that National Guard troops are not welcome in Chicago. Here's Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson arguing against why the National Guard should not be brought in, and also claims that shootings, well, they're just going to continue.
Shootings will continue as long as this presidential administration continues to put politics over people.
Joe, what are your thoughts on what's been happening over there?
Well, look, that mayor, Brandon Johnson, is one of the most unpopular people on the planet Earth. He's got an approval rating of about 23. And, I got a beef to pick here, Gabriella. I was born and raised in Chicago. And we've had very high homicide counts. When I was born, there were 1944, there were 244 deaths in Chicago. There are 253 so far this year. But, when I was a kid, the people who died were, it was gang wars, like the Valentine Days Massacre and the occasional crazy serial killer. But today, what we're talking about, what happened, over the weekend, I think 64 were wounded and 7 or 8 were murdered. These are drive-by shootings. These are just people who are out of control. And keep in mind here, when we're talking about Chicago, we're talking about 2.7 million people in 77 neighborhoods. Greater Chicago is 9.7 million people. So we're just talking about the South Side and the West Side. And, these places have been taken over by drug warfare and gangs. And just watch a Spike Lee movie or two to get the idea of what's going on. So President Trump's on the right thing here. But people can't disagree with the mayor too much, because most of the jobs in Chicago are patronage jobs. That is, the mayor appoints the police chief, fire chief, and all the rest of them. And if you want to keep your job, you got to shut up publicly. But I'll tell you this. I know a lot of Americans, a lot of Chicagoans, and they are quite happy to see the federal guard. Now, the courts say they shouldn't be there. They shouldn't be processing, apprehending people or processing them and all the rest of it. But I think there'd be a lot of Chicagoans who wouldn't mind seeing some peace in the street. Yeah, it's a tough place. I grew up in a tough neighborhood, but we all made it. But look, that mayor there, and of course the governor, Pritzker, who's down in Springfield, he just loves the idea of picking a fight with President Trump because he's aiming for the White House. In fact, everybody who picks a fight with Trump is aiming for the White House.
Always.
America's that kind of place.
It is. Professor Joe Siracusa, thank you so much for your time. Lovely to speak with you.
Okay, thank you.